He smirked at me, leaned over, and whispered across the whole room. A desperate MILF like you've probably slept with half the office already. My name is Carla Bennett. I'm 48 years old, the senior secretary at one of the largest real estate investment firms in Houston, Texas. Every morning, I arrive at the office at 7:45 a.m., brew myself a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, nothing extra. Just like me, no need to be understood, no need to be noticed. I'm not young like the fresh graduates in pastel blazers, nor do I speak with syrupy sweetness or laugh too loudly at team lunches. I'm quiet, but everything in this office, from confidential contracts to sensitive files, passes through my hands. I know who's getting a raise, who's being watched, and who's about to lose their job next quarter. What no one knows is that I am also the legal, but not publicly known, wife of the company's chairman. We got married 5 years ago in a small, private ceremony at a secluded resort outside of Boston. No rings, no press, just a prenuptial agreement and a promise. At work, you're Carla, the employee. But at home, you're the only person I trust. I accepted that. Not because I was afraid of gossip, but because I understood something deeply. Real power is when no one knows you hold it. I dress modestly but form-fitting, knowing I still keep my figure. I don't need attention because the right kind of man, if he's perceptive enough, will see far beyond fabric. And fools like Ryan will only see the body of a middle-aged woman and think they have the right to comment. He had only been with the company for 5 months, and it took just 2 filthy jokes to completely destroy his career. Ryan Mitchell strutted into the office like he was stepping onto a runway. 35 years old, tight-fitting dress shirts, expensive slacks, a blinding white smile, and an ego bigger than his dreams of wealth. He knew he was handsome, and he thought that gave him permission for everything. I had seen hundreds of Ryans over 2 decades in this industry. Fresh grads full of bravado, divorced men chasing their lost youth, and idiots who believed that a middle-aged woman in a fitted suit was asking for it. At first, I ignored his little comments. "Ms. Bennett, I bet you used to be a model when you were younger, right? A hot woman like you can't possibly be stuck typing all day." I gave a thin smile and said nothing. I had been taught both in business and in life. When someone challenges you, don't strike back immediately. Stand still, they'll fall on their own. But Ryan didn't know when to stop. During a full administrative team meeting, in front of about 30 people, he half-joked, half-taunted. If this company handed out an award for easiest MILF, Ms. Bennett would definitely win. The room went dead silent. The air froze for a moment. A few gasps. A few awkward chuckles. I stayed still, hands resting calmly on the table, as if I were just listening to a list of order forms being read aloud. No reaction. Not even a frown. Inside, I already knew. The game had begun. He just didn't realize he had invited the wrong player to the table. I remained still, expressionless, while Ryan smirked and casually poured himself more coffee, as if he had just told a harmless joke. Around us, people stared wide-eyed at me, waiting, hoping for an explosion. A slap. A screaming match. An HR complaint. I gave them none of it. Inside, my blood boiled, each vein ready to burst, but outwardly I only smiled, just barely. A smile filled with pity. I had spent nearly 20 years in the American corporate world to understand one thing. Anger only makes a middle-aged woman look powerless. But silence can kill a man, slowly, with cold, deliberate cuts. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to cry. All I needed was to wait for the right moment. After the meeting, Ryan swaggered up to my desk, leaned down, and whispered shamelessly in my ear. "You know I was complimenting you, right? A woman like you, still so damn hot." I calmly folded the file in front of me, stood up, and gently brushed him out of my personal space. My voice was soft, low, deadly calm. "Ryan, you should enjoy the next few days. They'll be your last ones walking into this office. He burst out laughing, clapping me on the shoulder like I'd just told a funny story. I just smiled. In my world, every major staffing change starts with a closed-door meeting. And on that day's schedule, at 2 p.m., there was a special meeting already arranged. With the chairman himself, the man who shared my last name, Bennett, and wore the same wedding band I slipped on every night at home. At exactly 2 p.m., the internal announcement echoed through the office. All administrative staff, please report to the 12th floor conference room. Mandatory meeting. The chairman will preside. A wave of murmurs rippled through the floor. The chairman? In person? That hadn't happened not once in the past 5 years. I picked up my iPad and walked calmly toward the elevator, the steady click of my 2-inch heels echoing against the gleaming marble floor. Ryan followed behind me, hissing under his breath. Looks like the execs finally noticed me. Bet I'm about to get promoted. His voice was dripping with arrogance, his eyes flashing with a childish fantasy of power. I didn't answer. I just gave him a quick, cold glance through the elevator mirror, detached, indifferent. When we entered the 12th floor conference room, I slid into my usual seat in the 3rd row, the one I'd occupied for years. Ryan, cocky as a young rooster, plopped himself right in the front row, sitting up straight, hands poised on the table, like he was ready to be handed a trophy. A few minutes later, the doors swung open. Richard Bennett, chairman, the most powerful man in the company, and my husband, walked in. Outwardly, he was a cold, ruthless businessman, notorious for his sharp, unforgiving decisions. Privately, he was the man who whispered to me every night, "I'll protect you," in ways no one would ever suspect. Richard's eyes swept the room. He paused on me for just a second, no nod, no smile, no sign of familiarity, then settled on Ryan. No greeting, no small talk. He spoke straight to the room, his deep voice cutting through the air like a blade. Today, I have 2 announcements. First, the company will begin an internal review regarding workplace ethics and culture. Second, I'd like to introduce you all to the legal co-owner of this corporation. The room held its breath. Slowly, I stood up. Step by step, I walked toward Richard. Ryan looked at me, confused, his face scrunching up. Then he laughed, thinking it must be some weird corporate joke. Until Richard placed his hand lightly on my back, a touch that was both tender and unmistakably public, and the entire room fell into stunned, breathless silence. Richard lifted his head and announced, "Carla Bennett, my wife, and the shareholder who owns 32% of this company, will be overseeing the internal review with me." Ryan's face drained of color. I caught his gaze, empty, panicked, like a kid who just realized he'd been playing with knives on the edge of a cliff. I simply smiled. The real game had just begun. Ryan sat frozen in his chair, as if someone had just drained every drop of blood from his body. His mouth hung slightly open. His eyes blinked rapidly, trying to piece together what had just happened. I didn't blame him. Very few people knew about my discreet marriage to Richard. We had our reasons. To avoid unwanted scrutiny, to shield the company from gossip, and most of all, to protect our power with mystery. Ryan, who had barely been here for 3 weeks, couldn't have known that the woman he had made crude jokes about was one of the most powerful voices in the entire company. I noticed the sweat starting to bead on his forehead. Richard continued, his voice steady and cold. "I have received multiple reports of inappropriate behavior in the workplace. After this review, anyone found guilty, whether they're a junior employee or a senior manager, will face serious consequences." His eyes flicked sharply to Ryan, a glance like a blade. Ryan shrank back in his seat, gripping the edges of the table, his panicked eyes darting toward me as if pleading for help. I kept a polite smile on my face, slowly flipping a page on my iPad, jotting down a few notes. No nod, no forgiveness. In that room, power had shifted. No one saw me anymore as the 48-year-old head secretary easy to overlook. They saw me for what I truly was. A silent queen, deciding the fate of those who had underestimated her. Ryan knew he had lost. He just hadn't yet realized how heavy the price would be. As soon as the meeting ended, Richard left, off to his next string of appointments. And I stayed behind. The formal review began that very afternoon. I summoned Ryan into a private conference room, no lawyers, no HR representatives. Just me, a legal secretary recording the session, and him. When Ryan walked in, the swagger was gone. He kept his head down, fumbling as he pulled out a chair, his hands nervously locked together on the table. I opened the file in front of me, my voice calm and level. Ryan, I'll be asking you a few questions. You have the right to remain silent. However, anything you say may be recorded and used in the final HR decision. He swallowed hard and nodded. I began reading. Inappropriate emails he had sent me. Slack messages laced with suggestive comments. Reports from 2 female interns who had also been the targets of his so-called jokes. Each piece of evidence was like a bullet, cold, clinical, and aimed straight at the heart of his fledgling career. Ryan stammered. I didn't know who you were. I didn't mean to offend you. I lifted my head and looked him straight in the eye for the first time since this whole ordeal began. Ryan, the fact that you didn't know who I am isn't the issue. The issue is, you look down on women. You think that middle-aged women in the workplace are easy, weak, and unprotected. My voice was soft, almost a whisper. But within that softness, Ryan heard the verdict already rendered. I closed the file in front of me and signaled for the secretary to stop recording. The final decision will be announced tomorrow morning. You can start clearing out your desk tonight. Ryan had nothing left to say. He stood up, his face drained of color, and quietly shuffled out of the room like a shadow. I watched him go, without a flicker of pity. Because sometimes, the humiliation a man sows becomes the pit he digs for himself. As the meeting room door clicked shut behind Ryan, I sat alone in the empty space, the sunlight from the tall windows casting a quiet golden glow over me. I closed my eyes, and in that moment, old memories rushed in like a tide. I remembered the first time Richard, and I decided to marry. No grand wedding, no public announcement. Just a private agreement. I would keep my job at the company, like any other employee. We would keep work and marriage strictly separate. And I would never use my title to impose on anyone. I used to believe that if I was good enough, no one needed to know who I was. I wanted to stand on my own, to be recognized solely for my competence and composure. But over the years, I had paid a price. The looks of disdain, the whispers behind my back, the young interns who thought they had the right to joke about the value of a middle-aged woman. I had stayed silent. Not because I was weak, but because I chose to protect the peace for myself, for Richard, and for the small, quiet family we had built on mutual trust. Yet today, when Ryan stood before the entire office, mocking me, demeaning me with cheap words, I realized my silence no longer protected what I cherished. It only made those who lacked respect think they had the right to do as they pleased. And when men like Ryan think they have that right, that's when a woman like me must rise. Not with noise, not with spectacle, but with a silent strength, powerful enough to shift the entire room. I opened my eyes and took a deep breath. I felt no anger, no bitterness, only a cold, steel-like clarity rising within me. I had stayed silent long enough. Now I would let the truth speak for me. I stood up from the leather chair, the soft clicking of my heels steady on the wooden floor. Each step matched the slow, resolute beat of my heart. When I was younger, I used to think strength came from shouting the loudest, from fierce arguments that wrestled respect from others. I believed that to avoid being crushed, women had to rage, to pound the table, to roar like fire. But after nearly 3 decades in this world, among cold handshakes, watchful eyes, and traps hidden behind polite smiles, I learned one truth. Real strength comes from calm, from the ability to stay still when others lose their composure, from waiting for the right moment, and with one single, precise strike, end the game. Ryan thought I was just another easy MILF. Others in the office once thought of me as an aging secretary about to be pushed out of a sharp, youthful world. They saw the silver strands in my hair, the crow's feet at the corners of my eyes, the modest, polished suits. They didn't see the woman behind it all. A woman who knew when to endure and when to strike. A woman who understood that real power isn't about noise, it's about making people fall silent in her presence. I smiled to myself, remembering their whispers behind my back. None of it mattered anymore. Their cheap jokes, their looks of disdain, they could no longer touch me. I had outgrown the need for their recognition. Now I chose who was worthy of knowing who I truly was. And Ryan, along with men like him, would forever remain a mere footnote in my story. A small, irrelevant detail. I adjusted my jacket and strode out of the meeting room, head held high. I didn't need anyone to know I was the chairman's wife. I didn't need anyone's validation. I knew who I was, and that, more than anything else, was an invincible kind of power. As that day came to an end, a strange feeling surrounded me. It wasn't triumph or the thrill of victory. It was an unexpected sense of peace, as if a heavy burden I had carried for years had finally been lifted. I sat alone in my office, the dim light casting my reflection across the polished desk. Everything had happened so quickly. Yet, a peculiar thought lingered in my mind. Not every battle needs to be won by crushing an opponent. Ryan had been defeated in the eyes of everyone. He would never again dare to humiliate anyone, especially a woman, the way he did. But I knew deep down, a chess game doesn't truly end just because a piece has been knocked off the board. What I wanted wasn't his destruction. I wanted him to understand the wisdom in how I chose to respond. The next morning, I decided to call Ryan back into my office. This time, there would be no meeting minutes. No witnesses. Just the two of us in private. Ryan entered, his eyes still clouded with worry, like a man bracing for a final verdict. But I didn't speak right away. I sat quietly, studying him for a long moment. Finally, I broke the silence. I'm not going to ask you to leave the company, Ryan. There's no need for any severance. I paused, letting the words settle. But I want you to learn something. Respect isn't earned through sarcasm. Sometimes, all it takes to show true respect is a sincere apology. Ryan stayed silent for a while, his eyes darting around, uncomfortable with my calm demeanor. I saw him open his mouth, hesitate, then finally lower his head and speak in a soft voice. I'm sorry. Truly sorry for making you uncomfortable. A simple apology. But I realized that in this world, sometimes forgiveness is the greatest victory. Not every battle needs a winner and a loser. Sometimes, winning simply means maintaining your peace and fairness, no matter how many try to drag you down. I gave a small, gentle smile. This is your last chance, I said. If it happens again, I won't hesitate. Ryan stood up, visibly shaken but somehow different. I could tell. He would not dare cross that line again. And I also understood something new. In a world full of cheap shots and hidden traps, sometimes the real game is not about fighting harder. It's about teaching a lesson worth remembering. The next day, when I walked into the house, a heavy, unfamiliar feeling settled over me. Richard was already home, sitting in the living room. The old wooden coffee table between us felt like an invisible wall, even after all our years together. The light outside was fading, the late afternoon sinking into evening, but the air inside the house felt colder than ever. Richard looked at me with a gaze I recognized instantly, the look of someone who already knew the truth. He didn't have to say a word. I knew it the moment I walked in. The tension between us was thick enough to touch. He knew about what had happened with Ryan. And now there was no more hiding. I heard about what happened at the office, Richard said at last, his voice low but not angry. It was weighed down with something else, weariness, restraint, something I'd never heard from him before. I sat down across from him, leaving an intentional distance between us, wide enough to feel the emptiness. You don't have to say anything, I replied quietly. It's already been handled. Richard was silent for a long time, then spoke again. He's an idiot. He didn't know who you were, but this isn't just about him. A chill ran down my spine. Richard wasn't just talking about Ryan anymore. He was talking about me. About us. I know how long you've stayed silent, Richard continued, his voice steady but piercing. But what have you really done to protect yourself? Or to protect us when things got complicated? His question hit me like a blade. It was the very question I had been asking myself for days. How long had I been silent? And was my silence truly a form of protection, or just an act of avoidance? I looked into Richard's eyes. He wasn't angry. There was only helplessness there, as if he no longer understood what I was trying to do, or who I was becoming. I smiled faintly, feeling like a different woman now. Richard, I said softly, I protected myself in the way I thought was best. But now I have to make a different decision. Will I keep staying silent? Or will I stand up and finally speak for him, for you, and most of all, for myself? Richard watched me closely, his eyes softening, as if searching for the answer in my face. And in that moment, I realized something with absolute clarity. Silence is not protection. It's only a temporary pause. The truth must eventually be faced, no matter how much it changes everything. The silence between Richard and me didn't last much longer. The unanswered questions swirling in my mind suddenly became clear. I looked at him, my heart full of tangled emotions, fear, hope, longing. It felt like standing at a giant crossroads where every step forward could change the course of my entire life. Richard remained where he was, never taking his eyes off me. But this time, his gaze wasn't filled with anger or helplessness. It was filled with something else. True care. The quiet loyalty of someone ready to walk this uncertain road with me, no matter where it led. As the day came to a close, a strange feeling enveloped me. It wasn't a sense of satisfaction or the thrill of victory. It was a surprising feeling of peace, as if a burden I had carried for so long had finally been lifted. I sat alone in my office, the dim light casting my reflection onto the desk. Everything had happened so fast, but a strange thought lingered in my heart. Not every battle needs to be won by defeating an opponent. Ryan had been defeated in everyone's eyes. He would never again dare to humiliate anyone, especially a woman, in such a way. But I knew a chess game doesn't end just because a piece has been pushed off the board. What I wanted wasn't to crush him. I wanted him to recognize the wisdom behind the way I handled things. The next morning, I decided to call Ryan into my office one more time. This time, there would be no official minutes. No supervisors present. Just the two of us in private. Ryan entered, his eyes still carrying a look of worry, as if he was about to hear his final verdict. But I didn't speak right away. I sat quietly, studying him for a long moment. Finally, I broke the silence. I'm not going to ask you to leave the company, Ryan. There's no need for a clean break. I paused, letting my words sink in. But I want you to learn something. Respect isn't something you earn through sarcasm. Sometimes, all it takes to show respect is a sincere apology. Ryan stayed silent for a while, his eyes darting around, as if unfamiliar with my patience. I saw him open his mouth, hesitate, then close it again, as if unsure where to begin. Finally, he lowered his head and said in a soft voice, I'm sorry. Truly sorry for making you uncomfortable. A simple apology. But I realized that in this world, sometimes forgiveness is the greatest victory. Not every battle needs a winner and a loser. Sometimes, victory is simply about maintaining your calm and your sense of fairness, no matter how many people try to pull you down. I smiled gently. This will be your last chance. If it happens again, I won't hesitate. Ryan stood up, his face still confused, but I could see a change in him. I was certain he would never dare cross that line again. And I also understood. In a world full of cheap shots, there are times when you need to control the game in your own way. Not by attacking, but by teaching a lesson worth remembering. The next day, as I stepped into the house, a heavy, unfamiliar feeling washed over me. Richard was already home, sitting in the living room. The old wooden coffee table between us felt like an invisible wall, even after all these years together. The light outside the window was fading, late afternoon was sliding into evening. But inside, the house felt colder than ever. Richard looked at me with a gaze I recognized immediately. The gaze of someone who already knew the truth. He didn't need to say anything. I knew at the moment I stepped through the door. The heavy air between us told me all I needed to know. He knew about Ryan and me. And now I had no choice but to face the truth. I heard about what happened at the office, Richard finally said, his voice low, not cold, just tired. There was a restraint in his tone that I had never heard before. I sat down across from him, deliberately leaving space between us, wide enough to feel the emptiness growing there. You don't need to say anything else, I answered softly. I've already handled it. Richard stayed silent for a long time before speaking again. He's an idiot. He had no idea who he was dealing with. But this isn't just about him. A shiver ran down my spine. Richard wasn't talking about Ryan anymore. He was talking about me. About us. I know how long you've stayed silent, Richard continued, his voice steady but piercing. But what have you really done to protect yourself, or to protect us, when things started to fall apart? His question struck straight into my heart. It was the same question I had been asking myself these past few days. How long had I been silent? And was my silence truly protecting anything? Or was it just another way of running away? I looked into Richard's eyes. There was no anger there. Only a helplessness, as if he no longer understood what I was trying to do, or who I was becoming. I smiled faintly, feeling like a different woman altogether. Richard, I said, I protected myself the way I thought was best. But now I have to make a real decision. Will I keep staying silent? Or will I finally stand up and speak? Not just for him, or for you, but for myself. Richard watched me intently, his eyes softening, searching for something in my face. And in that moment, I realized, with absolute clarity, silence is not protection. It is only a temporary pause. The truth must be faced, no matter how much it may change everything. The silence between Richard and me didn't stretch much longer. The unanswered questions swirling inside me suddenly became clear. I looked at him, my heart brimming with complicated emotions. Anxious, hopeful, yearning. It felt like standing at a giant crossroads, where every step forward could change the course of my life. Richard remained seated, his eyes never leaving mine. But this time, his gaze held no anger, no helplessness. It was filled with something deeper. Genuine care. The quiet loyalty of someone ready to face whatever came next, right beside me.